Clap to sync. Alright. Let's get controversial, but not in any way that matters or people really care about. But hey, we're gonna have fun in this brief, informative, brief video. Don't look at the time code, don't worry about it, you don't need that. So, daylight savings. Daylight savings time? Daylight saving. Okay, so it turns out it's pronounced daylight saving singular. Hey, what did I say about being informative? And we've barely even started. If you have any questions at any point, just shout them out. Daylight saving is when we move the clocks forwards an hour for the summer months and back again for the winter months. Why am I using vague language instead of exact dates? Because nobody agrees what dates to do it on. We'll get to that later. The rationale behind shifting time is to prolong the amount of daylight, especially in the evenings, we have. So, how did all this start? Well, the year is 1916, and the European nations decided that the best way to obliterate each other most efficiently is by changing the hands on their clocks slightly. Well, actually it started in 1905, when an Englishman went on a horseback ride in the morning and noticed the sun. Or, if you ask Wikipedia, it began in 1895 with a New Zealand bug collector who wanted more time in the evening to collect bugs. Well, actually, according to this BBC article, it began in 1784 when Benjamin Franklin, star of Hamilton probably, wrote a satirical letter whilst in Paris about how too many candles were being used up. Or it started with the advent of the clock in... Look, weirdly, there's a lot of misinformation out there about the history of daylight saving, which has a frankly bizarre cameo-filled history, except it's not Stan Lee showing up. It's a lot of the worst men you can possibly think of, as well as Chris Martin of Coldplay for some reason, as well as a litany of the worst attempts at accents you have ever heard. Sorry in advance. But in return, I am going to get to the bottom of this subject before this day is done, and we are going to come up with a definite conclusion on what should be done about daylight saving. Should we keep it, or should we destroy all of our clocks and live by the sun in the woods with the pig boys? But before all that, we need to talk about the wild, sexy history of daylight saving time, or DST for short. And I can't emphasize enough how sexy this history is, especially if you've got a thing for moustaches and pointless bureaucracy. The year is 1895. They hadn't even had one world war yet, let alone two. Children were hanging out in Dickens novels, workshops, and chimneys. Whilst the train had been invented, the platform apparently had not. It was a simpler time. Our story begins with the man who amassed the finest and most perfect collection of New Zealand insects ever formed by any one person, and writer of literary classics such as The Butterflies and Moths of New Zealand, and my personal favourite, New Zealand Neuroptera, a popular introduction to the life histories and habits of mayflies, dragonflies, caddisflies, and allied insects inhabiting New Zealand, including notes on their relation to angling, or, as the true fans call it, NZNAITTLHAHOMDCAAIINZ for short. It's about time people started talking about caddisflies, by the way. They've been getting away with too much for too long. Of course, the man I'm talking about is George Hudson, who, my flippancy aside, did do great work in the field of insects in New Zealand. However, it was in a New Zealand field with insects where George Hudson found himself pioneering modern daylight saving. Thing about bugs, very small and very hard to see in the dark. We don't eat 8 spiders per year in our sleep because we can see them. George wanted 2 extra hours of sunlight in the evening so he could go about cataloguing those damn caddisflies some more. He sent a paper to the Wellington Philosophical Society proposing a 2-hour daylight shift. There was some positive buzz, presumably from the bugs, and he was the talk of the town, but that's because it was 1895 and there were like 6 people alive back then. He followed up with an 1898 paper and nothing. Literally nothing. When I said he pioneered modern DST, I wasn't being entirely truthful. Yes, he wrote those papers, and yes, there was some positive interest, but that's it. A lot of websites credit him as the father of daylight saving time, but he's just not. They credit him with DST because Wikipedia does. But the idea of shifting our behaviours to best make use of sunlight is an idea that's been around pretty much since civilization has. It's how we used to live. We'd get up with the sun and we'd go to bed when it's set. It's hardly reinventing the wheel because, newsflash, it's an idea that's older than the wheel. The real pioneer of DST... Oh. The real pioneer of DST was the designer and builder of houses, William Willett, or Double W to his friends. He was said to have a love affair with light, so much so that his actions literally changed your life directly, assuming you live in one of these countries. His design philosophy was described by the trade publication The Builder as, no matter how many little points in the exterior might be improved by the sacrifice of a little light somewhere inside, the sacrifice was never permitted, for he looked on light, especially sunlight, as all-important. I mean, they got a point. Look at these interiors he designed. So much light. I love it. Side note, if the occupants of these houses are watching, I apologise, but don't you dare take that light for granted. I see those curtains. On a horseback ride in the early morning of a summer's day in 1905, William Willett noticed something he thought was unusual. The fucking sun, and nobody around to enjoy it. What a travesty, Double W thought. By the time people finished work in the evening, it was already getting dark. If you wanted to, say, go out and play around at golf after a hard day's work, you couldn't. Look, as much as this story about Double Dubs noticing the sun on his early morning horse ride is plausible, he really loved his golf, and he did work regular hours. It's a bit more poetic to go with the horseback story rather than I altered the course of human history because I wanted to play some golf. Double Dubs' solution was to move the clocks forward for the summer and back again for the winter months, and to make it as convenient as possible, he proposed we set the clocks forward by 20 minutes every Sunday in April at 2 AM, before setting them back on every Sunday in September, for a total of 8 time changes per year. Sorry, I meant convenient in the same way that a rubber ring made of nails would be. So, how did Double Dubs go about changing the world with his revolutionary ideas? Well, he used the Twitter /Facebook /Instagram /Threads, alright, /LinkedIn /Curry's customer support of his day. Pamphlets. This isn't the exact one, this one is for Dinosaur World and Torquay, which me and my girlfriend at the time planned to go to. We also plan to stay together, so it's funny how things work out. In 1907, Double Dubs published The Waste of Daylight and handed it out to anybody that would take it, at his own expense. He calculated that by simply shifting daylight to make it lighter in the evening, the savings on coal and candles would be £2 million. That's £2 million 1907 money, which works out at £378 million now. His workings are rough and unverified, however even 10% of that would still be a result. Sherlock Holmes' dad and staunch believer in fairies, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, said, "It seems very strange that in the course of the world's history, so obvious an improvement should never have been adopted." Who knew he was Scottish? Or wherever he's from, apparently. Member of Parliament Robert Pearce went nuts for the proposal and wrote to Willett, "The high merit of your proposal is the simple way of it, and the extraordinarily slight disturbance of existing things." Willett's idea wouldn't be known as daylight saving until the Daylight Saving Bill was introduced to the House of Commons in 1908. It gained the support of nearly 200 MPs, and a select committee was set up to discuss the idea. They deemed that 8 time changes per year were stupid, and that it would make much more sense to change the time by an hour twice per year. Willett, presumably seething in embarrassment, relented and amended the waste of daylight accordingly. However, there was a lot of pushback from the scientific community. Director of the Meteorological Office, Sir William Napier Shaw, declared that to alter our present mode of measuring the time would be to kill a goose that lays a very valuable egg. The scientific journal Nature said, "It would be more reasonable to change the readings on a thermometer at a particular season than to alter the time shown on a clock," which is another scientific instrument. They then said, presumably swirling white wine and peering over the rims of their glasses, that it would be as feasible to increase the readings of a thermometer by 10 degrees during the winter months, so that 32 degrees Fahrenheit shall be 42 degrees Fahrenheit. The Outlook, a British magazine, voiced this concern. If, for instance, a man were going to a 7 o'clock dinner, under the new arrangement of daylight, he would appear on the streets of London in evening dress at 5:40, which would shake the British Empire to its foundations! Out of daylight saving and the British Empire, only one still exists now. You might have heard the lie that we do DST for the farmers. Sure, in the same way that we fumigate houses because we love termites. It literally could not be further from the truth. So why do farmers have such strong objections to DST? Because on a farm, things need to be done at the same time every day, and changing the clocks doesn't actually change the time that stuff needs to be done. It just means that they need to be done an hour earlier. Animals don't really have a concept of time. They just know when the sun rises and the sun sets. Cows, for example, need to be milked at the same time every day. If they don't, they get all confused. And the last thing you want is a confused cow. Why would you want to confuse them, hey? By changing the clocks to an hour earlier, if you were milking them at 5 AM, you now need to milk them at 4 AM, and that's just a ball ache. The broad consensus was that whilst DST would be nice, it's impractical. Getting a bunch of people to do something pretty minor twice a year? We don't live in a dream world, idiot. The solution to getting more hours of daylight is to just get up earlier. The select committee that was set up for DST met 13 times and heard testament from 42 witnesses before ruling favourably, and listed 6 principal benefits. William Willett had done it! He'd finally achieved... What? I have no intention of giving facility for the backing of the daylight saving bill. Who said that? Ah, great. Let me introduce you to Helena Bonham Carter's great-grandfather, Herbert Asquith, Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time. His lack of support meant that the bill did a Spencer Perceval and died in Parliament. Too soon? Willett did not give up. He had some powerful backers, including the Home Secretary and my distant cousin, according to Ancestry.com, Churchill. Wow, I had no idea I was a crossbreed. Ah, well, he's clearly a crossbreed, but don't tell him. He wouldn't like it. In 1911, he delivered a speech outside London's Guildhall at an event organised by Willett. Churchill said, "An extra yawn one morning in the springtime, an extra snooze one night in the autumn is all we ask in return for dazzling gifts," as well as predicting a brighter and healthier world would raise statues in honour of Mr. Willett and decorate them with sunflowers on the longest day of the year. I already apologised, so I'm not apologising for accents again. The bill was put in front of Parliament again in 1911, and then again in 1912 and 1913, all failing to pass. But Willett was unperturbed. He kept going and kept updating the waste of daylight, so by 1914, it was on its 19th edition. Willett then went international. He wrote to every single member of Congress in the United States and gave a talk at the International Congress Chambers of Commerce in Paris to delegates of 37 countries. Subsequently, DST bills were introduced in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and whilst there was some support, ultimately none were approved. Fun fact about William Willett, his great-great-grandson Chris wrote a song called Clocks about DST, presumably, and it reached number 9 on the UK singles chart in 2002. Chris is in Chris Martin of Coldplay. There goes my frog. Yeah, it's good. I like this album. Coldplay get a lot of shit, but actually, some of their early stuff, pretty good, alright? And some of their later stuff. I like Everglow. I like that tour they did with the... This is why I don't improv, because it's just not funny. After William Willett died, his daughter wrote, "Above all, he loved sunlight." Yeah, got that. He died in March of 1915. Daylight saving, the course that had been his driving force for the latter period of his life, was implemented in 1916 by Britain's closest ally at the time, Germany. Oh, fuck. World War One. So we'd had wars before, and as a world we decided to have one big one to get it all out of our systems, then have no more wars ever again. The fact that they called it World War I doesn't bode particularly well for the future, but hey. The First World War started in 1914. All hands were on deck in the UK, with every major industry concentrated on the war effort, including energy. To save on energy, the movement behind DST found renewed life. In February of 1916, Sir Basil Peto, Member of Parliament for Devizes and owner of the greatest name of all time, asked the still Prime Minister Asquith if, perhaps due to the big war that was going on, perhaps, please, can we have some daylight savings, please? Asquith replied with a no, f*** you. So, what could it possibly take for Britain to adopt such radical measures such as DST? Well, maybe the most British reason of all to do anything. Spite. The German Empire implemented daylight saving, or Sommerzeit, under emergency powers on April 30th, 1916, for the same reason the advocates in the UK wanted to save on coal and electricity costs. There was no vote, and it required no legislation. It was widely accepted and to little opposition, probably due to the big war that was going on. Austria-Hungary followed suit, as well as the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden. So, remember how in Britain it's taken over a decade to get to this point with DST, and all of the effort and all of the hard work, and it still hasn't passed in Parliament? Yeah, Britain passed a DST bill 8 days later by 170 votes to 2. That's 2 months after Asquith said, "No, never, over my dead body, when pigs fly, don't hold your breath, you twat!" There was a bit of opposition in the House of Lords. Lord Balfour of Durley raised a concern that's at the top of everybody's list when they raise issues with daylight saving. Supposing some unfortunate lady was confined with twins, and one child was born 10 minutes before 1 o'clock, if the clock was put back, the registration of the time of birth of the two children would be reversed. The elder child would be recorded as being born at 12:50, but the younger child, born 10 minutes later, would be recorded as being born at 12. Lord Balfour argued, such an alteration might conceivably affect the properties and titles in that house, meaning that because the second-born was legally older, property and titles, on the event of their parents' death, would be passed to them instead of their elder but legally younger sibling. Lord Balfour had inadvertently stumbled onto a great point, that passing things down to just your eldest born, such as titles or properties, is stupid. The bill received royal assent, also stupid, and was made into law on May 17th, 1916, 8 years after the first bill was brought in front of Parliament. In a speech to Parliament, staunch supporter of DST and man with chicken foot as a hand apparently, MP Sir Henry Norman said, "Nobody can speak of daylight saving on the eve, as I hope it may be of its triumph, without a word of tribute to the memory of the late William Willett. I venture to think that the time will come when the workers of this country will desire to erect to William Willett, in grateful memory, a statue on some peak where it would be gilded by the first ray of an April sunrise, 1 hour in advance of Greenwich Mean Time." As an MP, a rich MP, a knight of the realm, maybe he could have commissioned the statue himself, instead of leaving it to the workers of this country, many of whom are off fighting a pointless war on his behalf. On Sunday, May the 21st, 1916, daylight saving in Britain began at 2 a.m, only 4 days after the bill reached final approval, and 3 weeks after Germany implemented their version. According to the Times, children begged to stay up and see their parents move the clock forward 1 hour. Children, lacking critical thinking skills, didn't realise that staying up late to watch would require the lights to be on, which would use up precious electricity, which is the whole point of this stupid thing. Luckily, due to advancements in modern technology, I can provide a demonstration on what the kids would have seen. Most people were on board with it, and the Times declared summertime is already an accepted institution. Reductions in electric lighting averaged at about 20%, which was the equivalent of a 1% cutback on coal used for all purposes that year. That doesn't sound like very much, but it works out at over 2.5 million tonnes of coal. Due to the benefits, it was determined that DST would stay around after the end of the war, if it ever did end, and it did! Although, does war ever truly end? Isn't it just a vicious cycle of rinse and repeat with the veneer of progress, but ultimately as a species we just fall back into our destructive ways? They don't call me the people's champion for nothing. Mostly because no one calls me. By the end of World War I, 31 nations had adopted DST. Look, when I went into this project, I had a vendetta against DST. I was going to list all the detrimental impacts on health, George Hudson's weird bug antics, and above all, how it's really, really, really annoying. But I think I support it. At least at this stage in history. It was the right thing to do. We'll get into the negatives later, believe me, but right now, it makes sense. The savings to coal are undeniable, and who doesn't like a bit more sun? What do you think? Me? No. Him. Your mic's not plugged in. I'm not holding a mic. Well, I hope he doesn't show up again. You don't have to worry about him anymore. I've taken over. DST had gone down an absolute treat in Europe. All opposition had evaporated after people realised that the sky hadn't fallen after people moved their clock hands slightly. It was a success. However, Scientific American predicted, whether the English measure be passed or not, it is unlikely that any daylight bill of this kind will be introduced in the United States. But that's enough for now. I've run over and my plane is literally about to leave the gate. That's right, I've been recording this from an airport terminal this whole time. Like and subscribe, or don't. I'm mostly doing this for me anyway. See you in part 2. Wait.